The mafia boss's world shatters when his ex walks past him in the park with twin children who carry his unmistakable features. Years ago she disappeared without a word, because she uncovered a deadly order issued by his father to eliminate any heirs born outside marriage. To save her unborn children she ran, raising the twins in silence and fear. What the boss doesn't know is that his fiancée has always been aware of the twins' existence. She hid the truth to secure her engagement, believing marriage would grant her the power to control the dynasty, and eventually erase the children for good. When the truth begins to unravel, the mafia boss is forced to confront the ultimate betrayal. The woman beside him plotted against his blood, while the woman he lost sacrificed everything to protect it. Now, with enemies closing in and secrets exposed, he must choose between the empire he was raised to rule and the children he never knew he had. The silence that followed Connie's chilling admission was louder than the screams of 100 dying men Michael had heard throughout his career. He looked at his fiancée, the woman who had sat at his dinner table, shared his bed, and whispered promises of a shared dynasty, and felt a sickening realization. He didn't know her at all. She wasn't just a socialite with a sharp mind for business. She was a viper who had been coiled around his heart, waiting for the right moment to strike at his very bloodline. Michael's mind raced back to the day Kay had vanished. It had been a Tuesday much like today. He had come home to their apartment, a sanctuary away from the smoke-filled rooms of the Tarasov estate, expecting to find her reading by the window. Instead, there was only a cold breeze from an open balcony and a single sheet of paper on the mahogany desk. "I don't love you anymore. Don't look for me." He had spent millions, sent his best trackers from the Atlantic to the Pacific, but it was as if she had walked off the edge of the earth. Now he knew why. She hadn't been running from him. She had been running from the shadow of his father, Viktor Tarasov. Viktor had been a man of ancient, brutal traditions. To him, the Tarasov blood was a sacred river that could not be tainted by illegitimacy. He believed that a leader with weak links in his lineage was a leader who could be leveraged. He had once sat Michael down when he was only 12, showing him a litter of hounds. Viktor had picked up a pup that was smaller than the rest, a runt born of a stray that had jumped the fence. He didn't say a word as he walked to the pond and held the creature under until the bubbles stopped. "The blood must be pure, Michael," Viktor had whispered, his eyes as cold as the Siberian tundra. "Anything else is a liability." Michael had spent his life trying to be the man his father wanted. Ruthless, calculating, untouchable. But with Kay he had found something he never thought possible. A reason to want a life outside the shadows. And while he was mourning her loss, spiraling into a dark depression that nearly cost him the throne, Kay was living in a nightmare of his family's making. How long? Michael's voice was a low growl vibrating with a lethal intensity. He stepped toward Connie, ignoring the two bodyguards who shifted uneasily behind them. "How long have you known about my sons, Connie?" Connie didn't flinch. She smoothed the front of her Chanel coat, her expression shifting from cold calculation to a terrifyingly calm rationale. "Since before the engagement, Michael. I did what was necessary for our future. Your father's decree wasn't just a suggestion. It was the law of the family. If the board of directors, if the other families, knew you had two bastards living in a walk-up in the suburbs, your position would be compromised. You are the Don. You cannot have vulnerabilities." "Vulnerabilities?" Michael roared, the sound echoing off the trees, causing a group of nearby pigeons to take flight in a panicked blur of gray wings. "Those are my sons. By blood." He turned back to Kay, who was still clutching the stroller, her knuckles white. The two boys, Dom Soprano and Brian Soprano, were looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. Dom, the one with Michael's piercing gaze, reached out a small hand toward a stray leaf. The innocence of the gesture sliced through Michael's armor more effectively than any blade. "Kay, I swear to you," Michael said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper, "I didn't know. I never would have let him. I never would have let anyone hurt you." "But they did, Michael," Kay said, her voice trembling with 5 years of repressed agony. "I lived in a different city every 6 months. I worked 3 jobs under names that weren't mine. Every time a black SUV slowed down near a playground, I felt like my heart was going to stop. I watched my sons grow up without a father because your world is a graveyard, Michael. And now you've brought the Reaper right to us." She looked at Connie with a mixture of pity and loathing. "She's been sending me reminders, Michael. Every month, a blank envelope would arrive at whatever hovel I was hiding in. Inside would be a photo of the boys taken from a distance. A crosshair drawn over their faces. A note saying, "Stay quiet, stay gone, or stay dead." The revelation was a physical blow. Michael felt a red veil of rage descending over his vision. He turned back to Connie, his hand twitching toward the holster hidden beneath his jacket. "You threaten my children?" he asked, his voice deathly quiet. Connie chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "I protected the crown, Michael. I knew that once we were married, once I was officially the matriarch, I could handle the situation permanently. I could ensure there were no claims to your estate that didn't come through me. I was doing you a favor. I was cleaning up your mess." In that moment, the true depth of Michael's isolation became clear. He was surrounded by people who saw his life as a game of chess, where human beings were merely pawns to be traded or discarded. Even his right-hand man, Vincent Conway, who was currently watching from the perimeter, had likely known something. The web of the Tarasov Empire was thick with secrets, and Michael was the spider caught in his own silk. Michael looked at his sons again. Dom and Brian. They were the only real things in his life. Everything else, the penthouse, the fleet of armored cars, the millions in offshore accounts, was just ash and smoke. He felt a sudden, overwhelming desire to just pick them up and run, to leave the blood and the betrayal behind. But he knew better. In his world, you didn't run from a threat. You extinguished it. "Vincent!" Michael shouted, not looking away from Connie. The tall, broad-shouldered man in the charcoal suit moved forward instantly, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. Vincent Conway had been Michael's shadow since they were teenagers, a man of few words and absolute lethality. "Yes, boss?" Vincent asked, his eyes scanning the park, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Take Kay and the boys," Michael commanded, his voice shaking with the effort of containing his fury. "Take them to the safe house in the Berkshires. Use the unmarked vehicles. If a single hair on their heads is touched, I will burn this city to the ground with everyone in it. Do you understand me?" Vincent hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickering to Connie. "Boss, the council is expecting you at the warehouse in an hour. We have the shipment from the port of Long Beach coming in. If you aren't there..." "I don't give a damn about the shipment." Michael stepped into Vincent's space, the raw power of his lineage radiating from him. "You do exactly what I told you. Now." Vincent nodded curtly. "Understood. Let's go, ma'am." Kay looked at Michael, her eyes searching his for a sign of the man she used to love. "Michael, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish this," he said, his gaze shifting back to Connie, who was now pulling out her phone. "I'm going to find out exactly how deep this rot goes." As Vincent led Kay and the twins away, Michael watched them go, a hole opening in his chest. He saw Brian look back over his shoulder, a look of confusion on his small face, and Michael felt a silent promise form in his soul. "I will be the father you deserve, or I will die trying." Before we see the storm that Michael is about to unleash, I want to take a second to thank you for being here. This story is just beginning to unfold, and the stakes are higher than Michael ever imagined. If you're finding yourself rooting for Michael and his sons, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and leave a comment with the word protect if you think he should give up the empire for his kids. It really helps the channel grow, and I love seeing your theories. With the twins out of sight, Michael turned his full attention to the woman who was supposed to be his wife. Connie was tapping a message into her phone, her thumb moving with clinical precision. "Who are you texting, Connie?" Michael asked, his voice like the click of a hammer on a revolver. She looked up, her eyes devoid of any warmth. "The council, Michael. I'm letting them know that the Don has become compromised. That he's letting his emotions dictate the future of the Tarasov name. They won't be happy to hear that their leader is prioritizing 2 illegitimate children over a multi-million-dollar merger." "The council serves me," Michael snapped. "The council serves the interests of the family," Connie corrected him, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "And right now, Michael, you are no longer in the best interest of the family. You think you're the only one with power? My father didn't build the Wick Empire just so I could be a trophy wife. I have allies you haven't even met yet." She took a step closer, her voice a poisonous whisper. "You could have had it all, Michael. We could have ruled this city together. But you chose a ghost and 2 mistakes. Now you're going to watch everything you love crumble. Starting with that safe house." Michael's heart skipped a beat. He lunged for her, but Connie was already stepping back, her own security team, men he had trusted, men he had paid, moving in to form a human wall between them. "You made your choice, Michael," Connie said, her voice echoing as she turned to walk toward a waiting black sedan. "Now live with it. However long that may be." Michael stood alone on the grass, the autumn leaves swirling around his feet like tiny, dying flames. He realized then that the war wasn't coming, it was already here. His father's ghost was still pulling the strings, and the woman he trusted had just declared a bounty on his blood. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. A number that belonged to a man his father had exiled for being too loyal to the old ways. "It's Michael," he said when the line picked up. "I need the hounds. All of them. And I need them now." The battle for the Tarasov legacy had begun, and the park, once a place of peace, was now the starting line for a trail of blood that would lead either to redemption or to a shallow grave. She believed he could save them. And in that moment the inciting incident of Michael Tarasov's new life was complete. He wasn't a mafia boss anymore. He wasn't a businessman or a fiancé. He was a father. And a father with a gun is the most dangerous animal on the planet. But as he prepared to make a dash for the Suburban, a red laser dot appeared on the center of his chest. It danced there for a second, steady and mocking. From the ridge, a voice amplified by a megaphone echoed through the valley. "Stand down, Michael," the voice of Luca Brasi boomed. "The decree is absolute. The children do not leave this bridge. You can walk away or you can join them in the soil. It is your father's will." Michael looked at the laser dot on his heart. He looked at Kay and his sons. He knew that to save them he would have to do the one thing his father always said was impossible. He would have to break the Tarasov line to save the Tarasov blood. "Before we move into the heart of the fire, I have to ask, what would you do? If you were standing on that bridge facing your own father's ghost and a line of assassins, would you stay and fight, or would you try to negotiate? Drop a comment below with fight or talk. And please, if you're enjoying the tension, subscribe to the channel. Your support is the only thing that keeps me writing these high-stakes stories." Michael didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a flashbang grenade he'd kept since the war in the docks and pulled the pin. "Cover your eyes," he yelled to Kay. He threw the canister. The world turned into a blinding white scream. This was it. The bridge was burning, his empire was in revolt, and the woman he loved was staring death in the face. The inciting incident had set the world on fire. Now Michael had to decide if he was the water or the gasoline. The world exploded into a searing white-hot void. The flashbang didn't just blind the men on the ridge. It tore through the suffocating tension of the standoff, providing the only window of opportunity Michael had. He didn't wait for the spots in his vision to clear. He moved by instinct, the soles of his designer boots crunching on broken glass as he sprinted toward the Suburban. Bullets from the ridge began to rain down again, aimless, desperate fire from men struggling to reclaim their sight. Michael felt a sharp sting as a shard of asphalt kicked up and sliced his cheek, but he didn't slow down. He ripped the driver's side door open, shoved Vincent's bleeding form into the passenger seat, and threw himself behind the wheel. "Okay, stay down," he roared over the cacophony of gunfire. He slammed the vehicle into reverse, the reinforced engines screaming as he backed away from the bridge. He spun the wheel, the heavy armored car swaying dangerously, and hammered the accelerator. They weren't going to the safe house in the Berkshires. If Connie knew about the twins, she knew about the obvious retreats. He had to go somewhere off the grid, somewhere his father hadn't touched. As they tore down the winding mountain road, the two black SUVs from the ridge appeared in the rearview mirror, their headlights like the eyes of predators. "They're still on us," Vincent wheezed, clutching his shoulder. His face was gray, the loss of blood making his movements sluggish. "Michael, the council, they've frozen the primary accounts. I just got a ping. They've put a black label on you." A black label. It was the Tarasov version of a death warrant, issued only for traitors of the highest order. It meant that every soldier, every hitman, and every street-level informant in the city was now an enemy. Michael was no longer the Don, he was the prey. He looked in the rearview mirror, not at the pursuing cars but at the back seat. Kay was sitting upright now, her face a mask of pale determination. She had Brian's head pressed against her chest, her hand shielding Dom's eyes. Her gaze met Michael's in the reflection. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady for a woman who had just been hunted by professional assassins. "Somewhere safe," Michael promised, though the word felt like a lie. "There is no safe, Michael," Kay whispered. "Not as long as that woman is alive. Not as long as your father's ghost is still ruling that city. I'm going to end it, Kay. I promise you. You promised me a life once before," she said, a flicker of the old fire, the fire he had fallen in love with, igniting in her eyes. "And look where we are. On a mountain road, being shot at by your own family." The sting of her words was worse than any bullet. Michael pivoted the heavy vehicle into a sharp turn, heading onto an unpaved logging trail that cut through the dense forest. The Suburban jolted and bounced, the suspension groaning under the weight of the armor. The pursuing SUVs slowed, unable to match the ruggedness of Michael's custom rig on the uneven terrain, but they didn't stop. They were relentless. After miles of punishing terrain, Michael pulled into a hidden clearing where an old moss-covered cabin stood. It had belonged to his mother's family, the side of his bloodline his father had always tried to erase. It wasn't on any Tarasov map. He killed the lights in the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal and the ragged breathing of the people inside. "Vincent, get inside. There's a medical kit in the floorboards of the pantry," Michael commanded. He climbed out and opened the back door. The twins were silent, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. Up close, in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees, the resemblance was even more haunting. Dom had Michael's nose, Brian had his chin. They were small, fragile versions of himself, and the realization of how much time he had lost hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He reached out a hand to help Kay out, but she hesitated. Her eyes searched his, looking for the man she had loved, the man who used to bring her wildflowers and read poetry to her, hidden beneath the cold, hard shell of the Mafia Don. "Are you going to hurt them?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I would die 1,000 deaths before I let anyone touch them," Michael said, his voice cracking with a raw, unshielded emotion. Kay finally took his hand. Her skin was cold, but as her fingers laced through his, a jolt of electricity, the same connection they had 5 years ago, rushed through him. For a brief moment the war outside didn't matter. There was only the warmth of her palm and the weight of his son's presence. Inside the cabin the tension didn't ease, it shifted. While Vincent patched himself up, Michael started a small fire in the hearth to ward off the mountain chill. He watched Kay as she settled the boys on a pallet of blankets. She moved with a practiced, protective grace, her every thought focused on the children. "They're beautiful, Kay," Michael said, standing by the fire. You did an incredible job. All alone." Kay looked up, her expression softening just a fraction. "It wasn't easy, Michael. Every time they asked about their father I had to make up stories. I told them you were a traveler. A man who was building something big for them. I didn't want them to know the truth. I didn't want them to know about the blood." "They don't have to," Michael said firmly. "I'm going to make sure they never see that world." "How?" Kay stood up, her arms crossed over her chest. "Connie Wick has the backing of the council. She has the Wick family resources. She's already tried to kill them once today. She won't stop. She sees them as liabilities to her power. Connie is playing a game she doesn't understand," Michael said, his eyes darkening. "She thinks power is about spreadsheets and council votes. She doesn't realize that a Tarasov is most dangerous when he has nothing left to lose but his heart." Suddenly Michael's phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. A single photo. It was a picture of the cabin they were currently sitting in. Taken from the woods. Recently. "Get down." Michael lunged for Kay, tackling her to the floor just as the front window shattered. But it wasn't a bullet. It was a brick wrapped in a piece of paper. Michael crawled toward it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He unfurled the paper. It wasn't from Connie. "The Viper isn't the only one watching. The Wick family has a leak. Meet me at the old foundry at midnight if you want to save your sons. Come alone or the coordinates of this cabin go to the council." It was signed with a symbol, a small, stylized bird. The crest of the Falconer family, a smaller syndicate that had been absorbed by the Tarasovs years ago. "What is it?" Kay asked, her voice trembling. "A choice," Michael said, looking at the boys who were now crying in the corner. He felt a surge of frustration. Every move he made seemed to lead into another trap. Was this a genuine ally, or a red herring designed to draw him out into the open so Connie's men could finish the job? He looked at Vincent, who was pale but conscious, a pistol held firmly in his good hand. "Vincent, if I don't come back." "I know, boss," Vincent said, his jaw set. "They don't get through that door. Not while I'm breathing." Michael turned to Kay. He walked over to her, ignoring the danger outside, and took her face in his hands. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "I have to go. It might be our only chance to get ahead of Connie." "Michael, don't leave us," Kay sobbed, her hands gripping his wrists. "If you leave and they find us." "They won't," Michael promised. "I've set the perimeter alarms. If anyone comes within 100 yards, Vincent will know. Trust me, Kay. Please." In the silence of the cabin, amidst the scent of wood smoke and fear, Kay reached up and kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of desperation and lingering love, a bridge across 5 years of silence. It tasted of salt and hope. "Come back to us," she whispered. "Before we follow Michael into the darkness of the foundry, I have to know, who do you think sent that note? Is it a trap, or is there a secret player in this game that we haven't met yet? Tell me your theories in the comments. And if you're holding your breath like I am, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next chapter of this heart-pounding saga." Michael stepped out into the night, the cold air hitting his face like a slap. He checked his weapon, the cold steel a familiar weight. He knew the risks. He was walking into the lion's den, leaving his heart behind in a shack in the woods. But as he looked back at the glowing window of the cabin, Michael knew one thing for certain: the Mafia boss was gone. The father had taken his place. And the father was going to make sure that by sunrise, the city would know the price of threatening his blood. The tension was rising, the strings were tightening, and the game was about to get much, much deadlier. The old iron foundry stood like a skeletal giant against the bruised purple of the midnight sky. It was a relic of a forgotten era, a place where fire and steel once birthed empires, now reduced to a hollow shell of rusted girders and shattered glass. Michael Tarasov parked his car a quarter-mile away, approaching on foot through the tall, dry grass that hissed against his legs like a warning. His heart was a rhythmic hammer in his chest. Every shadow was a gunman. Every gust of wind was a whispered threat. He reached the heavy steel doors of the foundry, his hand steady as he drew his weapon. He wasn't the man who had sat in the park 12 hours ago. That man was dead, buried under the weight of a dozen betrayals. This man was a ghost, a vengeful spirit haunting the ruins of his own life. "I'm here." Michael's voice echoed through the vast, cavernous interior. "Show yourself." A flicker of light appeared on the upper catwalk. A silhouette stepped forward, lean and elegant, holding a small flashlight. "You're late, Michael." The voice was rasping, aged like fine leather left out in the rain. Michael recognized the voice instantly. It wasn't the falconer. It was Alfredo Shelby. Alfredo had been his father's consigliere for 30 years, the man who had taught Michael how to read a balance sheet and how to spot a lie. He had been retired to a villa in Tuscany 2 years ago, shortly after Victor's death. Or so Michael had been told. "Alfredo." Michael lowered his gun slightly, but his thumb stayed on the safety. "You're supposed to be in Italy. What is this? Why the falconer's mark?" Alfredo descended the rusted stairs with a slow, deliberate grace. When he reached the floor, the light of his torch caught the deep lines of a face that had seen too much blood. "The falconer was your mother's code name, Michael. Your father used it when he wanted to move assets without the council's knowledge. I used it because I knew it was the only thing that would bring you here without a small army." "You sent that note?" Michael stepped closer, the smell of oil and old soot filling his lungs. "You know about the boys? About Kay?" "I know everything, Michael. I'm the one who helped her disappear." The world tilted. Michael's grip on his pistol tightened until his knuckles ached. You were my father's shadow. You were there when he issued the decree. You watched me break for an entire year after she left." "I watched you survive," Alfredo corrected him, his eyes boring into Michael's with a fierce, paternal intensity. "If I hadn't moved her, Kay would be a memory and your sons would be ash. You think your father was a monster?" "He was. But he wasn't a fool. He knew the council and the Wick family were looking for a way to control the Tarasov line. If you had a wife and children you loved, you were a hostage. You were a weakness. So he ordered their death to protect me? Michael spat the words. No, Michael. He ordered their erasure from the record, Alfredo said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a weathered leather-bound ledger. He tossed it to Michael. Read it. Page 44. The pure blood decree wasn't a death warrant. It was a relocation protocol. Your father knew he was dying. He knew Connie Wick's father was positioning her to marry you and take over the syndicate from the inside. He couldn't stop the marriage. It was a treaty signed in blood decades ago. But he could ensure that your real legacy was hidden where the Wicks could never find it. Michael opened the ledger. His eyes scanned the cramped, Cyrillic handwriting of his father. The words blurred as he realized the truth. His father hadn't been trying to kill his grandsons. He had been funding their safety in secret, using a shell company called Falconer Logistics to pay for Kay's relocation, her security, and the boys' medical bills. But then the handwriting changed. The last few entries weren't in Victor's hand. They were in a sharp, slanted script Michael knew all too well. Connie. She found the ledger, Michael whispered, the horror dawning on him. She found it 3 months ago, Alfredo said. She didn't tell the council. He didn't have to. She used the pure blood decree as a legal shield. She started redirecting the Falconer funds to her own private security. The men who attacked you today. She's been gaslighting Kay for months, Michael. Sending those photos, making her think the Tarasovs were coming for her. All while she planned to wait until your wedding day to finish the job. Michael felt a wave of nausea. Connie hadn't just been protecting her interests. She had been playing a psychological game of cat and mouse with a terrified mother and 2 toddlers, waiting for the perfect moment to execute her final solution. Why did she walk past me in the park today with them? Michael asked, his mind racing. It wasn't an accident, was it? No, Alfredo sighed. Kay was tired of running. She thought if she could just see you, if she could show you the boys, you would end the nightmare. She didn't know you were with Connie. Connie orchestrated that chance meeting to force your hand. She wanted you to see them so she could frame their accidental deaths on a rival family, making you so grief-stricken and vengeful that you would sign over all executive power to her in the aftermath. The level of depravity was staggering. Michael leaned against a rusted pillar, the weight of the revelation crushing the breath from his lungs. He had been a pawn in a game designed by the woman he was supposed to cherish, all while his monster of a father had been trying to save him from the very trap he'd fallen into. There's more, Alfredo said, his voice dropping to a somber low. Connie isn't just working for her father. She's made a deal with the Irish Kings. They want the port of Long Beach. She's giving it to them in exchange for the elimination of the Tarasov Council. Tonight at the warehouse. It's not a shipment handover, Michael. It's an execution. Every man loyal to your name is walking into a slaughterhouse. Michael looked at the ledger, then at the man who had been his father's truest friend. Why tell me now, Alfredo? Why wait until the world is burning? Because you weren't ready, Alfredo said simply. You were a boss, Michael. But you weren't a father. You had to see what you were fighting for. You had to feel the loss before you could earn the win. Suddenly, the silence of the foundry was shattered by the high-pitched whine of a drone. Michael looked up, seeing the red light of a camera hovering near the skylight. They found us, Michael said, his hand flying back to his gun. Go, Alfredo commanded, pulling a submachine gun from beneath his coat. The ledger has the coordinates of the Irish King's safe house. That's where Connie is heading. She thinks she's won, Michael. She thinks you're still that broken man in the park. Alfredo, come with me. I'm an old man, Michael. I've lived my life in the shadows. It's time I saw the light of a good fire. Alfredo winked, a grim, determined smile on his face. Go save your family. And Michael, don't be your father. Be better. Michael didn't have time for a goodbye. He sprinted for the exit just as the first flashbang of the second assault crashed through the roof. He heard the roar of Alfredo's weapon behind him, a defiant symphony of the old guard protecting the new. As he reached his car, Michael's phone chimed. It was a video message from an unknown number. He hit play. It was Kay. She was back in the cabin, but she wasn't alone. The camera panned to show Vincent slumped against the wall, unconscious. And standing over the twins was Connie Wick, her silk dress stained with a single drop of blood, a silenced pistol held casually at her side. You have 30 minutes, Michael. Connie's voice was calm, almost bored. The warehouse or the cabin. Choose your empire or choose your ghosts. But remember, a king who loses his crown has no way to protect his heirs. The screen went black. Michael sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the wheel. This was the midpoint. The moment where every belief he held had been shattered. His father was a protector. His fiancée was a monster. His organization was a trap. He looked at the ledger on the seat beside him. He looked at the road leading back to the city and the road leading up to the mountains. Can you imagine the weight on his shoulders right now? To choose between the legacy of 100 years and the lives of 2 children who have your eyes? I want to hear from you. If you were Michael, which road would you take? Tell me in the comments, empire or family. And if you're as invested as I am, please subscribe. We are heading into the darkest hour and Michael is going to need every one of us behind him. Michael didn't hesitate. He slammed the car into gear. But he didn't go to the warehouse and he didn't go to the cabin. He went to the one place Connie would never expect. He went to find the Irish. The game had changed. The revelation was complete. Michael Tarasov was no longer playing by the rules of the Mafia. He was writing a new book and the first chapter was going to be written in the blood of those who dared to touch his sons. The rain began to fall as Michael tore toward the industrial district, a cold, needle-like drizzle that blurred the neon lights of the city into bleeding streaks of red and blue. Every second that ticked by on the dashboard clock felt like a physical blow to his ribs. 30 minutes. Connie had given him 30 minutes to decide between his empire and his blood, but Michael was gambling everything on a third option that felt more like a suicide mission with every mile he covered. His destination was the Emerald Isle, a derelict shipyard on the edge of the harbor that served as the primary base for Seamus Costello and the Irish Kings. If Connie had traded the Tarasov ports for the lives of his children, then Seamus was the only man who could call off the dogs. But as Michael pulled his car into the shadow of a rusted crane, he realized how thin his plan truly was. He was walking into the heart of enemy territory, alone, with nothing but a ledger of secrets and a heart full of desperate rage. He stepped out of the car, the silence of the shipyard heavy and suffocating. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and impending death. He hadn't even reached the main warehouse before the red beams of a dozen sniper rifles painted his chest, arms, and forehead. "Easy now, Tarasov," a voice boomed from the shadows. "We heard you were having a bit of a midlife crisis, but we didn't think you'd come here to end it so soon." Seamus Costello stepped into the light of a single flickering street lamp. He was a massive man, his face a map of scars and broken promises, holding a glass of whiskey that looked tiny in his meaty hand. Behind him stood 20 men, all armed with submachine guns, their eyes cold and hungry. "I'm not here to fight you, Seamus," Michael said, his voice raspy, his hands raised just enough to show he wasn't reaching for his weapon. "I'm here to offer you a better deal than the one Connie Wick promised." Seamus laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Connie promised us the port of Long Beach. She promised us the Tarasov shipping lanes. She's already delivered the council's heads on a silver platter. What could a dead man walking possibly offer me?" "The truth," Michael said, stepping forward despite the lasers dancing on his skin. "Connie isn't just giving you the ports. She's already contacted the authorities under a whistleblower's plea. She's setting you up, Seamus. The moment the first Irish shipment hits those docks under the new management, the task force, her task force, will be there to seize it all. She's not looking for a partner. She's looking for a scapegoat to cleanse the city so she can rule it with a legitimate face." Seamus's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You're lying. You're a desperate father trying to save his bastards. Look at the ledger." Michael threw the leather-bound book at Seamus's feet. Page 58. The Wick Protocol. It lists every Irish associate she's already flagged for the state prosecutors. She's been planning this since before my father died. She used the Tarasovs to build the wall, and now she's using you to tear it down so she can build a palace on the rubble. As Seamus leaned down to pick up the book, Michael's phone chimed in his pocket. A video call. Without permission, he swiped it open and held it up for Seamus to see. The screen showed the interior of the mountain cabin. It was a scene of absolute despair. Kay was tied to a wooden chair, her face bruised, her eyes wide with a terror that broke Michael's soul. Connie stood behind her, the silenced pistol now pressed firmly against the temple of little Brian, who was sobbing quietly, his small body shaking. Dom was huddled in the corner, a man in a black mask holding him down. "Time's up, Michael." Connie's voice came through the speaker, distorted and chilling. "I see you're at the shipyard. Bold move. You thought you could turn the Irish against me? You always did underestimate my foresight. Seamus, if you're listening, Michael is lying. The ledger is a forgery I planted to test your loyalty. Kill him and the ports are yours tonight. Hesitate and I'll ensure the Irish kings are the first ones to burn in the New World Order." "Michael." Kay's voice was a broken sob on the screen. "Please, don't let her. Please save them. I'm coming for you, Kay." Michael screamed at the phone, his composure finally shattering. "Connie, look at me. Look at me, you coward. Kill me but let the boys go. They're children." "They are vulnerabilities, Michael," Connie said, her finger tightening on the trigger. "And in this world vulnerabilities are deleted. Say goodbye to your legacy." The screen went black. "No." Michael lunged toward the warehouse, but he was tackled to the ground by 3 of Seamus's men. His face was slammed into the wet gravel, the taste of copper and dirt filling his mouth. "Wait!" Seamus roared, holding up the ledger. He had reached the page Michael mentioned, and his face had turned a deep, furious shade of purple. This isn't a forgery. This is my brother's signature on a confidential informant agreement from 3 years ago. Connie has had him on a leash this whole time." Seamus looked down at Michael, who was pinned under the boots of his soldiers, tears of pure agony streaming down his face. The darkest hour had arrived. Michael had lost his empire, his men were dead, and he was currently watching the clock run out on the lives of his children from the floor of a shipyard. He had never felt so small. So utterly, hopelessly defeated. "Get him up," Seamus commanded. Michael was hauled to his feet, his legs feeling like lead. He looked at Seamus, expecting the final bullet. Instead, Seamus handed him back the ledger. "She played us both, Tarasov," Seamus said, his voice low and lethal. "But you're too late. My men in the mountains just radioed in. Connie didn't wait for your choice. She's already given the order to torch the cabin with everyone inside. She's leaving no witnesses, Michael. Not even her own security team." The words hit Michael like a physical explosion. "Torch the cabin." "No," he whispered, his heart stopping. "No, no, no. My men are 10 minutes away, but by the time they get there it'll be a bonfire," Seamus said, a flicker of genuine pity in his hard eyes. "I'm sorry, Michael. You were a good Don. But you were a terrible gambler." Michael looked out toward the dark horizon, toward the mountains where his entire world was about to be reduced to ash. He felt a coldness settle over him, a numbness that was more terrifying than the rage. This was the moment of absolute darkness. He had failed Kay. He had failed his sons. He had failed the promise he made to his father's ghost. He fell to his knees on the wet pavement, the rain drenching him to the bone. The silence of the shipyard returned, heavier now, the sound of his own ragged, sobbing breath the only thing filling the void. He was a king of nothing, sitting in the mud, waiting for the smoke of his children's funeral pyre to rise into the sky. If you've ever felt like the world was crashing down on you, like there was no way out and every door was locked, then you know exactly what Michael is feeling right now. It's a pain that words can't describe. I want to ask you, at this moment when all hope seems lost, what would you do? Would you give up, or would you find one last spark of strength in the dark? Please, leave a comment with hope if you think Michael can still pull off a miracle. And if you're as heartbroken as I am right now, make sure you're subscribed. We are at the breaking point, and the next few minutes will decide everything. Michael closed his eyes. The image of Brian's tear-streaked face burned into his eyelids. He thought of the way Kay had kissed him in the cabin. A kiss of salt and hope. Hope. Suddenly, Michael's hand brushed against something in his pocket. Not a gun. Not a phone. It was the small wooden toy horse he had picked up from the park bench after Kay had walked away. It belonged to Dom. His fingers curled around the rough wood. The numbness shattered. A white-hot primal scream erupted from his lungs, echoing off the metal hulls of the ships. He wasn't finished. He looked up at Seamus, his eyes glowing with a light that made the Irish king take a step back. "The cabin isn't the only thing that can burn, Seamus," Michael said, his voice a death knell. "Give me a bike. Give me a gun. And tell your men to stay out of my way." "Michael, it's a suicide run," Seamus said. "Then I'll see my sons in the next life," Michael snapped, grabbing a rifle from the nearest guard. "But I'm taking Connie Wick to hell with me first." The darkest hour was at its peak, but in the center of the shadow, a fire was beginning to burn. A fire that would either save the Tarasov blood, or consume the entire city in its wake. The roar of the 1,200 cubic centimeters Ducati was a primal scream that tore through the mountain mist. Michael Tarasov leaned so low into the turns that his knee pucks scraped the asphalt, sparks flying into the darkness like dying stars. He wasn't riding a motorcycle. He was riding a bolt of lightning fueled by pure, unadulterated desperation. The rain lashed against his visor, blurring the world into a smear of gray and black, but he didn't need eyes to see. He could feel the cabin. He could feel the heartbeat of his sons pulsing through the forest, calling him home. Behind him, Seamus Costello's men were a distant thunder, struggling to keep pace. Michael didn't care if they showed up or not. He was the vanguard of his own revolution. As he neared the trailhead, a flickering orange glow began to dance through the trees. His heart stuttered. The fire. Connie's order had been given. But as he crested the final rise, he realized the glow wasn't the cabin in flames. It was the perimeter fuel drums he had set as a fail-safe days ago. Someone had detonated them. Michael slammed on the brakes, the bike fishtailing in the mud as he skidded to a halt 50 yards from the cabin. He jumped off before the kickstand was even down, the rifle slung over his shoulder. Through the smoke and the rain he saw a sight that changed everything. Vincent Conway wasn't slumped against the wall anymore. He was crouched behind an overturned heavy oak table on the porch, his face a mask of blood and grit, holding a tactical shotgun in his one good hand. And beside him, clutching a discarded pistol with a trembling but firm grip, was Kay. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the shield. "Michael." Vincent's voice was a ragged croak, nearly lost to the wind. Michael didn't hesitate. He opened fire on the two mercenaries who were trying to flank the porch, his shots precise and lethal. The turning point didn't happen with a miracle. It happened with the realization that he wasn't alone in this fight. His family wasn't just something to be protected. They were the fire that made him invincible. He reached the porch in a sliding tackle, pulling Kay into the cover of the heavy wood. For a split second, time stopped. The chaos of the gunfight faded. He looked into her eyes and he didn't see the fear he'd seen in the park. He saw a mother who had looked death in the face and told it to wait its turn. "The boys." Michael gasped, his chest heaving. "In the cellar," Kay said, her voice hard as flint. "I barricaded the door." "Honey, she's not here, Michael. She left the moment the fuel drums went off. She thought the fire would do the work for her. She's heading for the private airstrip," Vincent grunted, reloading his shotgun with a grimace of pain. "I overheard the radio chatter. She's got a Gulfstream waiting. She's taking the Ledger, the real one, and she's planning to vanish after the Irish shipment fails." Michael looked at the burning perimeter. He looked at Kay. This was the moment of truth. He could stay here, hold this cabin and keep them safe until sunrise. Or he could finish the woman who would never stop hunting them. "Go," Kay said. Michael looked at her, stunned. "Kay, I can't leave you again." "You aren't leaving us, Michael," she said, reaching out to touch the blood-stained collar of his jacket. "You're finishing the war so we can finally have a peace. Vincent and I can hold this. The Irish are coming, right?" "Seamus is 10 minutes out," Michael confirmed. "Then go," she whispered, leaning in to press her forehead against his one last time. "Don't be the Don. Don't even be the boss. Be the man who makes sure our sons never have to hold a gun." A new strength, something deeper than the Tarasov rage, surged through Michael's veins. It was the strength of a man who finally knew what he was worth. He realized the key to defeating Connie wasn't just the Ledger or the Irish. It was the fact that Connie fought for power while he fought for a home. Power can be bought, sold, or broken. A home is an anchor that holds against any storm. "Vincent," Michael said, looking at his oldest friend, "if a single person gets past you, they'll have to walk over my ghost, Michael," Vincent said with a bloody grin. Michael sprinted back to the bike. As he kicked it into gear, he saw the headlights of Seamus's convoy appearing at the bottom of the hill. He gave a sharp signal, the falconer sign Alfredo had taught him. The Irish trucks swerved, forming a protective ring around the cabin, their heavy machine guns turning toward the woods to mop up the remaining mercenaries. The tide had turned. Michael roared away from the cabin, his mind focused on the airstrip 5 miles away. But he wasn't just chasing a plane. He was chasing the closure of a 20-year nightmare. He knew Connie's weakness now. She believed everyone had a price. She believed that blood was a liability. He was going to show her that blood was the only currency that mattered. Before we enter the final heart-pounding confrontation, I want to take a moment to ask you something personal. What's the most courageous thing you've ever done for the people you love? We all have a turning point in our lives. Tell me yours in the comments. And if you're rooting for Michael to catch that plane, smash that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your energy is what keeps this story moving. As the airstrip lights appeared on the horizon, Michael saw the silver glint of the Gulf Stream. The engines were already whining, the stairs being retracted. He pushed the Ducati to its absolute limit, the speedometer needle buried in the red. The turning point was over. The hunt was ending. And Michael Tarasov was coming for his pound of flesh. The Gulfstream G650 was a silver bullet positioned at the end of the rain-slicked runway, its engines whining with a predatory hunger that vibrated through the very marrow of Michael's bones. The pilot was spooling up, the landing lights cutting 2 blinding swaths of white through the midnight downpour. Michael didn't slow down. He couldn't. The Ducati was a part of him now, an extension of his rage and his resolve. He didn't aim for the stairs. They were already being sucked into the fuselage. Instead, Michael leaned the bike into a suicidal tilt, cutting across the grass verge to intercept the plane's path. He pulled his sidearm, not aiming for the cockpit, but for the front landing gear's hydraulic lines. Pop, pop, pop. The pressurized fluid sprayed out in a crimson mist under the landing lights. The nose of the plane dipped slightly, the pilot frantically hitting the brakes as the steering became unresponsive. The jet began to fishtail on the wet tarmac, a multi-million-dollar bird with a broken wing. Michael slammed the bike into a slide, jumping off before it even stopped, his boots skidding across the asphalt. He reached the emergency hatch just as it began to seal. With a roar of effort that tore the muscles in his shoulder, he jammed the barrel of his rifle into the gap, leveraging the heavy steel door back open. He was inside. The interior of the jet was a sanctuary of cream leather, polished walnut, and the scent of expensive lilies, Connie's signature scent. It was a world of absolute privilege, built on the corpses of those who dared to stand in the way of the Wick and Tarasov names. 2 of Connie's personal guards lunged from the galley. Michael didn't even blink. He moved with a cold, surgical precision he hadn't known he possessed. He wasn't fighting for a seat at the council table anymore. He was fighting for a bedtime story. He was fighting for the right to see his sons grow old. Silence. The guards were down. Michael stepped into the main cabin, his rifle leveled at the silhouette sitting in the high-backed swivel chair at the far end. Connie Wick didn't look up. She was holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, watching the rain streak across the porthole. The leather-bound ledger sat on the table beside her, looking small and insignificant in the dim light. "You're a hard man to kill, Michael," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the auxiliary power. "I suppose I should have expected that. The Tarasov blood is like a weed. It takes more than a fire to clear the garden." "The fire is out, Connie," Michael said, his voice a low, vibrating cord of steel. "Kay is alive. My sons are alive. And Seamus Costello is currently taking apart your father's warehouse brick by brick." Connie finally turned her head. Her face was a mask of icy composure, but for the first time Michael saw the minute tremor in her hands. The predator was finally realizing she was in a cage. "It doesn't matter," she said, gesturing to the ledger. "I have the codes. I have the offshore routing numbers. Even if you kill me, the Tarasov accounts are locked. By tomorrow morning, the pure blood decree will be triggered globally. Every asset you own will be frozen, and every bounty hunter from here to Moscow will have a photo of those 2 little boys. You haven't won, Michael. You've just delayed the inevitable." Michael stepped closer, the light from the runway flickering across his face. He looked at the woman who had shared his life, the woman who had smiled at him while planning the murder of his children. He felt no hate, only a profound, hollow pity. "You really don't get it, do you?" Michael asked. "You think the ledger is the source of the power. You think the money is what makes it Tarasov." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted thumb drive, the one Alfredo had pressed into his hand in the foundry. "Alfredo didn't just give me the coordinates of the Irish. Michael said. He gave me the override. My father knew you were a snake, Connie. He knew you'd go for the ledger. That's why the ledger you're holding? It's a honeypot. Every time you accessed those accounts tonight, you weren't moving money. You were uploading a tracer to the very people you were trying to sell the ports to. Connie's eyes widened. She lunged for the laptop on the table, her fingers flying across the keys. Her face went from ivory to a sickly, translucent gray. No, she whispered. The balance, it's zero. It's not just zero, Connie. It's been redirected to a trust fund that you can't touch. A trust fund in the names of Dom and Brian Soprano. The pure blood decree? I deleted it 20 minutes ago. The only person with a bounty on their head tonight is you. The ultimate twist hit her like a physical blow. She had spent years playing a game of shadows, only to realize the shadows had been cast by a man she considered a fossil. Viktor Tarasov had protected his grandsons from beyond the grave, using Connie's own greed as the mechanism for their inheritance. You can't do this, Connie hissed, standing up, her hand reaching for a small derringer hidden in her silk garter. I am a wick. My father will. Your father sold you out the moment the Irish shipments were seized, Michael interrupted, stepping into her space, the barrel of his rifle pressing against her forehead. In our world, Connie, there is no room for failure. You're a liability now. Even to your own blood. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Michael looked at the trigger. He thought of the crosshairs drawn over his sons' faces. He thought of the fire at the cabin. It would be so easy. One flex of a finger and the nightmare would be over. But then he remembered Kay's words. Don't be the man who makes sure our sons have to hold a gun. If he killed her here in cold blood, he was just another monster in a long line of Tarasov monsters. He would be proving his father right, that the blood was a curse. I'm not going to kill you, Connie, Michael said, lowering the rifle. A flash of triumph flickered in her eyes. I knew you were weak, Michael. You're just like... I'm not finished, Michael said. He looked toward the cockpit. Seamus. Get in here. The cockpit door opened and Seamus Costello stepped out, accompanied by two of the Irish kings. They weren't looking at Michael. They were looking at Connie with the hunger of wolves. She's all yours, Seamus, Michael said, stepping back. She owes you $80 million and a lot of explanations about your brother. I believe the Irish have their own way of dealing with whistleblowers. The scream that left Connie's throat was the most satisfying sound Michael had ever heard. It wasn't the scream of a queen. It was the scream of a woman who finally realized that in the world of monsters, she was the smallest one in the room. Michael grabbed the real ledger and the thumb drive, stepping out of the jet and back into the rain. He didn't look back as the Irish trucks pulled up to the plane, the doors closing on Connie Wick's empire forever. As he walked toward the perimeter fence, he saw a pair of headlights approaching. It wasn't an Irish truck. It was a familiar, battered SUV. The door opened and Kay stepped out. She was shivering, her hair plastered to her forehead, but she was smiling. And from the back seat, two small heads popped up, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Is it over? Kay asked, her voice trembling. Michael dropped the rifle into the mud. He walked to her, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close, the scent of rain and survival filling his senses. It's over, Kay, he whispered into her hair. The war is done. We're going home. He looked over her shoulder at his sons. Dom looked at him, those icy gray eyes searching his. For the first time, Michael didn't see a ghost. He saw a beginning. Who is that, Mommy? Brian asked, pointing a small finger at Michael. Kay looked at Michael, a tear tracking through the soot on her cheek. She took Michael's hand and placed it on the boy's head. That's your father, Brian, she said. He's the man who brought us home. We have reached the peak of the mountain, the moment where justice is served and the cycle of blood is finally broken. How does it feel to see Michael choose mercy over vengeance to save his soul for his children? I want to hear your thoughts. Was this the ending Connie deserved? Drop a justice in the comments if you agree with Michael's choice. And please, if you want to see how this family heals and what the future holds for the Tarasov legacy, make sure you're subscribed for the final chapter. The climactic resolution was complete. The Mafia boss had died on that runway and a father had been born from the ashes. But as the sun began to peek over the mountain ridges, Michael knew that the real work, the work of building a life worth living, was just beginning. The sun dipped low over the rolling hills of Tuscany, casting a long amber glow across the rows of Sangiovese grapes that stretched toward the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the distant rhythmic chirping of cicadas. It was a silence so profound, so absolute, that for the first few weeks, Michael Tarasov had found it difficult to sleep. He was a man who had been conditioned by the hum of city traffic, the click of safeties, and the low-frequency vibration of constant danger. Now the only sound that mattered was the high-pitched, infectious laughter of two boys playing in the tall grass near the stone farmhouse. Michael sat on the veranda, a glass of water in his hand, his eyes never leaving Dom and Brian. They were 6 months older now, and in that short time the shadows that had once darkened their eyes had vanished, replaced by the boundless, fearless curiosity of children who knew they were loved. Dom was currently chasing a golden retriever through the vines, while Brian was intently examining a ladybug on a leaf, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "They're getting faster," a voice said softly from the doorway. Michael turned, a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes, spreading across his face. Kay stepped onto the veranda, wearing a simple white sundress that caught the evening breeze. She looked radiant, the hollows in her cheeks filled out, the haunted look she had carried for 5 years replaced by a serene strength. She sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder, and Michael instinctively wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "They're Tarasovs," Michael said, though the word didn't carry the weight it once had. "They don't know how to go slow." The transition hadn't been easy. Dismantling an empire of that size was like trying to stop a landslide with his bare hands. With the help of Vincent, who was now recovering in a nearby villa, finally enjoying a life where he didn't have to look over his shoulder, Michael had systematically liquidated the Tarasov criminal assets. The Falconer Foundation was no longer a shell company for hidden heirs. It was now one of the largest philanthropic organizations in Europe, focusing on the protection of women and children in conflict zones. The council was gone. The Wick family had been absorbed or neutralized by the Irish, who were too busy managing their newfound legitimate port interests to care about a man who had walked away from the throne. "I heard from Alfredo's lawyers today," Michael said, his voice dropping to a reflective tone. "The estate in Sicily has been cleared. He left everything to the boys. He wanted them to have the old world without the old blood." Kay looked up at him. "Do you ever miss it, Michael? The power? The city?" Michael looked out at the hills. He thought of that Tuesday in the park, the moment his world had shattered. He thought of the fire at the cabin, the cold rain on the runway, and the look on Connie's face when she realized she had lost everything. Then he looked at Brian, who had finally convinced the ladybug to crawl onto his finger, his face lighting up with a pure, unadulterated joy. "I never had power, Kay," Michael said. "I had a cage. I was a prisoner to a man's decree and a woman's ambition. This." He gestured to the boys, to the land, to the woman in his arms. "This is the first time in my life I've actually been free." The pure blood legacy had been a curse of exclusion and death. Michael had replaced it with a legacy of inclusion and life. He had proven that the true strength of a family wasn't found in the purity of its lineage, but in the depth of its sacrifice. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Dom came sprinting back to the porch, his face flushed and his hair a mess. He barreled into Michael's legs, hugging him with a strength that made Michael's breath hitch. "Daddy, look!" Dom shouted, holding up a smooth white stone he'd found. "It looks like a falcon." Michael took the stone, turning it over in his hand. Did look like a bird in flight, the falconer, the symbol of the woman who had started this journey of protection. He looked at Kay, and in the quiet of the Italian night, he felt a sense of peace that he knew was earned, not given. "It's perfect, Dom," Michael said, pulling both his sons into a hug. "Just like you. All the loose ends had been tied. The ghosts had been laid to rest. The woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her children was finally safe, and the man who had been willing to burn his world down to find them was finally home. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey of blood, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. This story has been a reminder that no matter how dark the past may be, love is the only fire that can truly light the way forward." If you were moved by Michael's transformation from a mafia boss to a father, please leave a comment with the word "redeemed." It's been an honor to share this story with you. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family for more emotional, high-stakes adventures. I'll see you in the next one. The sun had finally set, but as Michael walked his family back into the warmth of the farmhouse, the light in his life had never been brighter. The Tarasov name would continue, but for the first time in 100 years, it would be a name synonymous with peace.